Amid raging war in Ukraine, Russia has assumed the UNSC presidency. Despite Ukraine's complaints, the United States said that it could not block Russia, which is a permanent council member, from assuming the presidency. To understand the implications of what it means for Russia's war in Ukraine, we're now being joined by Russias UNSC, expert at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this is a rather bizarre situation. I mean, the UN Security Council is the international body for maintaining peace and security, and Russia, which has launched an invasion of Ukraine, has assumed the Council's presidency. What kind of repercussions will this have on the ongoing war in Ukraine?
I don't foresee any direct repercussions for it because the UN Security Council has been already basically in a deadlock for a long time because of this war. Most of the time, Russia has been vetoing certain proposals made by other Security Council members. If Russia now tries to push through certain decisions on its side, there will be other members of the Security Council, permanent members like the US, France, and Great Britain, that will veto any Russian initiative. So I don't think it has any practical repercussions. It will be a largely dormant institution for the time, at least in which Russia has the heading seat in this council.
Right. You say that there would be no direct repercussions or impact in the ongoing war in Ukraine, but reports suggest that that Russia will hold several debates, especially the ones on arms control. What do you have to say on that?
Yes, Russia can, to a certain degree, shape the agenda, but we've seen that already with the example of the Russophobia discussion in the UN Security Council, when Russia initiated a debate about alleged Russophobia, but that went then actually to the disadvantage of Russia. So I assume that the debates that Russia will now be initiating in the Security Council are also ambivalent. Arms control is, of course, an issue. But the problem here is that Russia itself is undermining the non-proliferation regime for nuclear weapons because Ukraine is a non-nuclear weapon state. Russia is a nuclear weapons state, and the fact that Russia now extends its territory at the expense of a non-nuclear weapons state is exactly undermining the arms control regime of the entire world. So all of these topics are problematic for Russia, and I wonder what Russia will actually do with that, because it can end in such a disaster for Russia as it was with the Russophobia debate.
Absolutely. I want to seek your perspective regarding if this could have been prevented, Russia assuming the UNSC Council presidency. Because the last time Russia assumed the UNSC presidency was when it launched its invasion of Ukraine.
The question here would be whether the General Assembly of the UN would be ready to either limit or perhaps do something with the membership of Russia in the UN Security Council, or perhaps even with the entire membership of Russia in the United Nations. The issue here is that Russia entered the United Nations in 1991 with an irregular procedure. First, the Soviet Union was dissolved, and after that, Russia sent a letter to the United Nations and then requested that it gets the seat of the Soviet Union in the General Assembly and in the Security Council, but it never actually went through a formal accession procedure of the United Nations. So this could be a starting point for perhaps limiting the rights of either limiting the rights of the Russian delegation in the United Nations, or even canceling the membership of Russia in the United Nations.
I was just coming to that. Like, can Russia really continue to have a permanent seat in the UNSC, especially after what happened in 2014 and then in 2022? For how long will this actually continue?
Yes, we are in a paradox, I would even say absurd situation, because the United Nations have in 1945 been created exactly to prevent those things that Russia has done since 2014, namely annexation of territories, change of state borders, simply taking away territory from a neighboring country, and since 2022 even engaging in a war that many classify as a genocidal war, as a war of annihilation, not just a war of aggression, but a war that also includes as a genocide. And these were, of course, those presumptions that were the most fundamental, I would argue, in 1945 to exactly create the United Nations, namely to make state borders secure, to prevent something like what Nazi Germany had done already before the World War II, and also to prevent genocide. The Holocaust, of course, was a sort of a crucial background for the creation of the United Nations. And now Russia is all that, is violating all that, and there are good grounds now to exclude Russia from the Security Council.
But absolutely. Now, we've seen how some countries have not really taken any side, either Russia nor that of Ukraine. So with Russia assuming the UNSC presidency, what kind of message does this send out to other countries who have maintained a neutral stance in the ongoing war in Ukraine?
I guess that depends on each country. The countries that have been sort of avoiding taking part in the resolutions of in voting for the resolutions of the General Assembly, for instance, in 2014 with regard to the annexation of Crimea, or in 2022 with regard to the with the start of the large invasion of Ukraine. These neutral countries have different motivations for not taking part in these in this voting. So it will depend, I guess, on each country how it will react. But that would be important, actually, because only the General Assembly of the UN could do something about it, because the Security Council is now sort of deadlocked because Russia has a permanent seat there. Russia is also supported by China in some of its policies, although China has also been neutral in these large votings about the annexations in 2014 and 2022. But the UN Security Council is now dysfunctional, but the General Assembly could do something, and perhaps the neutral countries here would play a crucial role, because they can then decide on whether there will be sufficient majorities to do something about this.
Right. You say that the UNSC Security Council is dysfunctional at the moment. And just to add to that, that there's also been an ICC warrant issued against the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But with Russia assuming the UNSC presidency, and if ICC warrant was to be carried out, how does that come into play in the current scenario?
Well, this is just one more time underlining the paradox or even absurd situation that we are in now, that Russia has basically taken over the seat from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was much more conservative in its behavior when the Soviet Union still existed. It also intervened in other countries, for instance, like 1979 in Afghanistan. But the Soviet Union never wanted to annex Afghanistan to the Soviet Union. And now we have a completely different country that has taken over the seat of the Soviet Union, and that is simply extending its territory at the expense of another full member of the United Nations. And actually, Ukraine is a founding member of the United Nations. Most people don't know that, but the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic entered as as an entity, as a member of the United Nations already in 1945 and not in 1991 when Ukraine became independent. So this is all now with this warrant also from the International Criminal Court, an absurd situation that is that has to be resolved somehow.
My last question to you, Mr. Andreas, before we let you go. In your viewpoint, when do you think that the war will actually end? We've already completed a year. When do you think that Russia's aggression in Ukraine will end?
One of the most serious German language military economists, Markus Heup, he has recently calculated that probably it will end in autumn this year, because simply Russia will run out of weapons. He has calculated the sort of decay of the Russian army over the last year, and so he is expecting the war to end already this year, by the end of this year. I also think that this is currently the most likely scenario. There may not be a full peace by the end of this year, but this large fighting will probably end by the end of this year.
Right, absolutely, Mr. Andreas. We're hoping for the same. Thank you so much for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.